The ceasefire over. President Trump threatens more airstrikes on Iranian targets, but don't worry, the president says this new war won't last long. Political journalism loves metaphor and alliteration, so here goes. Graham Platner is doing his best potted plant imitation as Maine Democrats wait for his campaign to complete its faceplant. What is your brand of American history? Shiny and heroic, all disquieting truths disappeared? Or greatness, flaws, and evolution intermingled and explained? That's what's at stake at the Smithsonian. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Wait, what? The ceasefire is over? The memorandum of understanding null and void? Yes. And if you want emphasis on the yes part, a second round of U.S. airstrikes on Iranian targets has just been launched. Central Command has confirmed. That's new. I'm old enough to remember when the MOU was such a good deal, a path to peace, a vast improvement over the Obama nuclear deal, and a surefire solution to skyrocketing gas prices. It was only a few weeks ago. I'm sure you remember that as well. Quick refresher. This is mid-June. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance.
I really believe it's a regime change because I find these people to be much more rational than the people that are no longer with us.
The coolest thing about the progress we've made over the last few weeks is that you see people within the Iranian system, senior leadership, even IRGC officials say, you know what? We may have some animosity, we may have some mistrust, but we recognize the way that we've done business with the United States for 47 years is a mistake. Let's try something else.
And this was Trump at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, today.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people.
The Strait of Hormuz, according to dispatches today, does not have a single vessel actively broadcasting its position on either the so-called Iranian or Omani routes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean no vessels are transiting the strait. What it does mean is that danger and instability have returned. Iran struck 3 vessels yesterday, prompting that first round of U.S. airstrikes. Iran today more or less threatened to keep it all up, raising the stakes for oil markets that thought they were in the MOU clear. Oil futures traded up, inching closer to $80 a barrel. Quick reminder, when this war began, the average price of regular gas here was $2.98 per gallon. Today, $3.79 per gallon. Now, that's down, I grant you, from $4.16 a gallon a month ago, but it's still elevated and to many consumers, irritating. The president also made news today on Ukraine and Patriot missile systems and Israeli troops in Lebanon. To summarize a very hectic day at the NATO summit, we turn with confidence to Ed O'Keefe in Ankara.
Major, you got it started there for sure. Look, he began the day, the president did, quite angry at Iran, at NATO, and by the end of the day was sort of lowering the rhetoric, at least, even though the U.S. Central Command told us just a few minutes ago that they've launched new strikes along the Strait of Hormuz, just reading from their statement here, to further degrade the ability of Iran to threaten freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States is holding Iran accountable for recent unjustified aggression against commercial shipping and civilian crews freely navigating a vital international waterway. But this entire blow-up today, both militarily and rhetorically and diplomatically at the NATO summit, led to a spike in oil prices. And I was struck most during his marathon press conference, the third marathon exchange with reporters today, that when he got asked by a reporter point blank, are you starting over the war? He said in part, I think anything that happens is going to be over very quickly and will only make it safer, including for oil, because there had been a question about the fact that oil spiked today so quickly. So what did we see yet again today? We saw the president start the day angry, threatening to rip things up, mess with what had become the status quo, walk into a meeting with fellow NATO leaders and suddenly apparently take a much more diplomatic and relaxed tact with them. By all accounts, including his own, it was a good meeting. It was a productive one. He reiterated U.S. support for and participation in the NATO alliance. And then he walked out and said, yes, we are going to strike tonight, because he had suggested that earlier in the day when he had his first blow-up. But this isn't like the relaunch of the war. Don't worry. So what is it now? Well, that's going to depend on how Iran responds. And there have been some suggestions today by Iranian officials that for every one thing we hit, the Iranians are going to hit two. And where are they going to hit them? They're going to hit them across the Gulf. So it's not just U.S. targets necessarily. It could be the Bahrainis again, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, and others. And that may prompt or force the president back into a more escalated military engagement. But what we saw today was just kind of a great example of what he does, right? He says he's going to do one thing quite dramatic and unexpected. And by the end of the day, he's trying to claw it back.
And Ed, there was news the president made about Patriot missile systems and Ukraine and what he thinks will be the future disposition of Israeli troops in southern Lebanon.
Right. On the Ukraine matter, most especially notable that he's now essentially allowing Ukraine to construct Patriot missiles inside Ukraine. So they're licensing out the technology to allow them to build them there. That will obviously lead to some American defense dollars being earned, but also allow for them to be produced a lot faster by the country that needs them most of all. They had a pretty good meeting, Trump and Zelensky did, suggesting that the two of them are trying to come up with a way to meet with Putin face-to-face. The president at one point said that Putin had said, yes, I'd like you all to come to Moscow. And Trump said, well, I got to put myself in the mindset of Zelensky. You don't want to go to Moscow, do you? And Zelensky said, no, there's too many Ukrainian drones there, which prompted the president, reporters in the room to laugh because, of course, Ukraine has been launching so many long-range drones into Ukraine. And then in his meeting with the new Syrian leader, there were suggestions, yes, and in his engagements with Turkey, that those two countries are going to continue to somehow play a role in sorting out what to do about Lebanon and try in hopes that Israel will wind that conflict down as well, which, of course, has been a sticking point in the talks with Iran. So ultimately, look, there was a fair amount of diplomacy conducted here, save for the military attacks that are going on in the country next door, Iran, tonight.
Ed O'Keefe in Ankara, Turkey. Thank you very, very much. CBS News national security analyst Aaron McClain joins me now. He's also host of the School of War podcast. Quickly, let's talk about the Patriot missile licensing for Ukraine. How big a development is that?
In the broad run, it's certainly a sign of a warming of relations between Trump and Zelensky, personally, this administration and Ukraine more broadly. In terms of the short-term battlefield impact, I fear it's going to be pretty limited. These are complicated weapon systems. They take a while to assemble in the factories that already exist, where there are, as you know, massive shortages. So there's a lot of obstacles between the willingness to issue a license and actually building the things.
But the symbolism is important, and it suggests that the president now sees Ukraine and Zelensky as a worthy fighter against Russia in ways he might not have 2 years ago.
Another bad headline for Vladimir Putin. It's really been a bad few months for him. And on some level, that's what the president is reacting to. He likes to back winners. He doesn't like backing losers.
What do you make, and that's a dumb question, so I regret phrasing it that way, the second round of strikes today, does that fully jeopardize the memorandum of understanding and basically render the ceasefire over?
Yeah, this MOU is on life support at best. At best, the president, in one of his moments today, basically declared it dead. That may well be the case. Look, I think this second round of strikes is very significant. Why? Because we've been through so many rounds of this in the last couple months, and it has a kabuki-like quality. There's a provoking incident, usually the Iranians taking a shot at something, though not always. Then the United States responds, hits targets in Iran. Then Iran fires some missiles at the Gulf, and then it stops. And we've seen that over and over again in the last couple months. But this time, there's a new round. We're hitting back at that Iranian missile strike. So that in and of itself is escalatory, and I'm looking to see other indications that we are stepping up in an escalatory fashion.
And Ed made mention of this. Iran has threatened to retaliate, and earlier in this conflict, the way it retaliated was to take aim at infrastructure in neighboring Gulf states. That would be the thing to watch most.
I think that's right. That certainly is an available target for them. They've already been going after shipping in the Strait, which they've long threatened to do. Targets in the Gulf, infrastructure targets in the Gulf, obviously there if they feel particularly threatened again. This has the potential to escalate substantially. Back to March, April levels, we'll have to see. I'm looking to see what kinds of targets we're striking in Iran. Are they in that maritime zone? Or are they further inland, not related to the question of the Strait of Hormuz? I'm looking to see allied participation. Are our allies in the region participating? Is the Israeli Air Force going to participate? We don't know that, but these would all be markers of escalation if we saw them.
Aaron McClain, great stuff as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danone, joins me now. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to have you on the program. I don't know if you can say or if you know, but let me just ask you, do you have any knowledge of whether Israeli Defense Forces are participating actively in this second round of U.S. strikes against Iranian targets?
Thank you for having me, Major. I cannot confirm any participation of Israel. We fought together with the U.S., and if we need to have it again, we will be there. We will be ready to retaliate if we will be attacked. But at that moment, we count on the leadership of President Trump on this situation. But we are following very carefully the situation.
The president said today, and I raised this with our correspondent Ed O'Keefe, that he thought it might be possible that Israeli forces will soon withdraw from southern Lebanon. I've watched very closely the interviews that the prime minister has given. He's given no indication of that. Is there a disconnect there?
Absolutely not. There's great communication. The prime minister spoke with the president, and we are coordinating our efforts, and we are grateful for the mediation between Lebanon and Israel. And I want to remind you, Major, we signed a historic framework agreement with the Lebanese government, and we intend to implement this agreement. The timeline is not about dates, it's about the capabilities of the Lebanese military to mobilize their forces to areas that we will depart, and basically making sure Hezbollah is not coming back to southern Lebanon. In the long run, we have no intention to stay in Lebanon. We want to see the Lebanese military there and not Hezbollah, and I hope it will happen. We hear very good voices coming from Beirut, but now we have to see the implementation, if they are actually capable of delivering.
As you know, Mr. Ambassador, that's always been the difficulty, or the primary difficulty, the inability of the Lebanese government and its military to take on Hezbollah and to eject them from southern Lebanon. That seems to be the sticking point now.
Yeah, but now there's a difference. We pushed Hezbollah from those locations. So basically, they don't have to fight Hezbollah. We did the hard work, but they will have to come and take the positions that we are gradually will evacuate. So it will be a gradual process. We will verify that they're actually capable of doing that, because the last thing we want to see is Hezbollah coming back to the border, threatening our citizens again. We don't want to be back where we were a few months ago.
Mr. Ambassador, explain to me and to my audience how it would be that Israel would withdraw from this security perimeter it has established inside Lebanon. What are the conditions in which that would begin to happen?
So, for the long term, the vision for us is to see the Lebanese military deployed on the border. If you look at the border between Israel and Egypt today, you have the Egyptian military, and we coordinate, the movements, and we coordinate everything with the military there. Same with the Jordanians on our eastern border. So that's ideally what will happen. We don't want to see UNIFIL, UN forces. I hear voices now of some of the European countries that they want to send troops to the region. We don't want them, and we don't need them. We want to deal directly with the Lebanese government, with the Lebanese military, and they should make sure that there is one military, one government, and they enforce the sovereignty of Lebanon over southern Lebanon. So once they are able to mobilize, take the positions, we will start to deploy our forces back to Israel, but we will verify that they are actually bringing their troops and not allowing Hezbollah to go back.
Mr. Ambassador, Rahm Emanuel, who's well known to Americans, lots of different political roles in our country, Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, Mayor of Chicago, Ambassador to Japan, gave a speech, as you know, today at the University of Tel Aviv, very critical of the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I want to play you a soundbite from that and get your reaction. Please, sir.
Unconditional support has produced a prime minister who has presumed that his strategic interests would incur no political costs if he ignored America's concerns about settlements and sparked a regional war. Unconditional support has allowed you to deny food and medical relief to innocent Palestinians.
Mr. Ambassador, Rahm Emanuel also said in that speech that Israel has become a pariah and has lost all support in Europe and has lost domestic political support in America. I'd like you to evaluate what you heard from Rahm Emanuel.
With all due respect, I know Ram very well, and I can tell you one thing. We share the same values, and we have the value of democracy and freedom. The Israeli people elected Prime Minister Netanyahu again and again to lead the nation, and they know what they are doing. So we have elections coming up in October. the Israelis will go to vote again, and it's up to them to decide who is the best leader for Israel. Not for Rami Emanuel and not for anyone else. It's for the people of Israel to choose their leadership. They will decide if they want to support Netanyahu or not. And I think everyone that come to Israel and enjoy the democracy we built should realize that that's part of democracy. Free elections, we're electing our own leaders ourselves.
Also, I want to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, about something that Rahm Emanuel said in his speech, kind of an over-the-horizon perspective. No longer a two-state solution, which he said is losing dramatically political support in the region, but what he called a 23-state solution. All the Arab League nations, and then a Palestinian state, an Israeli state, everyone interlocked economically, culturally. He said that would change the policy, change the politics, change the region. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a nice slogan, but practically speaking, after October 7th, we realized that we have Hamas radicals on our border, and we saw what they did to our people in the communities on October 7th. So, we are a peaceful nation. We want to normalize relationship with all the Arab countries in the region. We are successful with some of them. Hopefully, we'll see more joining the Abraham Accords. But practically speaking, you have two forces in the Middle East, the radicals and the moderate. With the moderate, we can speak about everything. With the radicals like Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, we have to fight them. There's no other choice. So you can be optimistic about the Middle East, but you have to face reality and make the distinction between the evil forces of radical Islam and the moderate voices of Islam that we welcome and we hope to move forward with them.
Very quickly, Mr. Ambassador, how do you evaluate the speed and likelihood of a disarmed Hamas in Gaza?
So President Trump's plan was very clear. There is a future for Gaza only after disarmament of Hamas. If Hamas will stay there, there will be no future in Gaza, regardless of the amount of money that countries are willing to invest there. So we are still waiting to see whether they will do it voluntarily. And if not, we will have to force them to disarm. We will not allow Hamas to stay in power in Gaza. And it's not only for our security, it's also about the future of the people in Gaza. They will not prosper if Hamas will stay there. They are suffering under the occupation of Hamas in Gaza, not the Israeli occupation, the Hamas occupation of Gaza.
Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. I appreciate the time, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Now the main event. Graham Platner's campaign has all but collapsed. He could withdraw from the race at any moment, and there is reporting that there's going to be a video released later tonight with more details about whatever he is or isn't going to do. Platner, meanwhile, and the state Democratic Party have been fighting over the timing of Platner's exit and the process to find a new nominee. And by the way, that is a kind of microcosm of party-wide Democratic tussles between the perceived establishment and perceived outside renegades. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from Portland, Maine, with all of the topsy-turvy events of the day. CHB, take it away.
Hey, Major. Well, this is such a beautiful state, but it is in a state of mess right now when it comes to Democratic Party politics. There's finger pointing everywhere. Democrats are furious and frustrated that Platner has put them in this position and has prolonged the process of exiting the race. And they're saying that the longer he stays in, the more difficult it is to find a replacement, go about that process, and work towards their ultimate goal, which is defeat Susan Collins. I mean, remember, Democrats can't win back the Senate without winning back Maine. So this is such a key race here. And all through the day today, you've had this Democratic infighting. First, the Democratic Party said that Platner was trying to put his thumb on the scale and trying to influence the process of finding a nominee once he drops out. The Platner campaign said, no, they were just reaching out to the Democratic Party to kind of gauge what the process would be. And they're also insisting that the voters, not the party establishment leaders, should decide this thing. The Democratic Party came back again today and said, Platner, in their words, is focused on distracting from the job of defeating Susan Collins. But the Maine Democratic Party remains hyper-focused on developing a representative, transparent, and inclusive process to find a new nominee. They also said, we are so thankful for Graham Platner's supporters who are a vital part of our party. And Major, that really gets to it here because There is also a concern that Platner has brought in a lot of disaffected voters into the fold. And his argument is that he wants to keep that momentum going for the November election. Democrats need those voters, too. So they're kind of walking a fine line here. Meanwhile, Major, Platner hasn't even dropped out yet, but there is already a field of potential candidates just waiting in the wings to jump into this race potentially should he drop out. I want you to take a listen to one of them, Dr. Nirav Shah, who we spoke to earlier today. He ran for governor in the governor's race just last month, didn't win that one, but he tells us he's considering possibly jumping into this one. Take a listen.
The answer is yes. The time for him to have made a decision was the minute these allegations dropped. His first video should have concluded with, "I am withdrawing from this race." The second best time for him to have made a decision is literally any minute after that. Any minute, every hour that goes by without him withdrawing and allowing the party to initiate its process to find a successor is another hour that the eventual nominee is behind, and another hour where Susan Collins gets to solidify and fortify her base. Literally, we are in a situation 4 months out where every day matters, and we need to get to the nominating process so the nominee can get out there as quickly as possible.
And so the clock is ticking, Major. He has until 5 p.m. on Monday to drop out so the party can then begin the process of selecting a nominee. And after that, they would have 2 weeks. The end of July is their deadline to pick whoever comes next.
A couple other names, Maine State Rep Valley Geiger and Dan Kleben of Maine Beer Company. They've also talked about possibly running. It could be a ring with lots of hats in it once the ring is established. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so very much. Still to come, stock slump and oil prices take flight, the economic subplot of the newest twist in the Iran war drama. Also, Michigan's Democratic Senate primary, well, it has a new look. Only 2 candidates now. And plenty of charges and countercharges between Congresswoman Haley Stevens and Dr. Abdul El Sayed. Plus, the White House accuses the Smithsonian of bias and hostility to whites in its handling of the nation's history. A Washington Post op-ed contends the White House has a bias problem of its own. The op-ed's author, Philip Kennicott, joins us. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Oil prices rose more than 7% to a 2-week high after President Trump said the Iran ceasefire is over. Brent crude is trading around $80 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate trading about $75 per barrel. There was also uncertainty on Wall Street. The Dow fell nearly 600 points. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ, well, they stayed mostly flat. Joining me now, Joseph Micah, Director of the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic International Studies. Joseph, great to have you here. So I've been reading about this, and as I understand it, during the war and the instability that ensued, when oil was not flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, the United States and others so positioned drew down their oil reserves and their own strategic petroleum reserves.
Yeah.
Did that buffer things, and can we still do that?
You know, when the Strait of Hormuz closed late February, early March of this year, it was an enormous shock to the system. And a lot of analysts looked at that and thought, okay, prices are about to skyrocket. And prices went up, but in an attenuated way.
Right. They didn't go to 150 or 200, which some analysts thought was possible.
And you've got the explanation for that right on the head. We went into that crisis with record high inventories in commercial stocks. I mean, this is oil and products in tanks, and tankers floating on water. And we went in with record highs. And, you know, US EIA says we ate into those about 5 million barrels a day at the depth of that crisis. So if, you know, we ended when the Strait of Hormuz reopened with depleted global inventories, and then now if we're facing, again, closures, we're going to have a lot less cushion than we started with last time, and prices will reflect that more quickly.
Meaning they'll go up more quickly if, in fact, this is a prolonged process of closing down the strait because there's just not as much to draw down on to buffer the supply-demand
The right way to think about it is one of the things that kept the crisis from being a bigger economic crisis or political crisis was these large stocks and buffers. We ate into those. And so now if you have another big problem getting oil out of the strait, we're going to have shortages and price increases.
I have read also, Joseph, that after this event, starting February 28th, oil markets and oil trading will not be the same. It's not going to return to what it was and the assumptions about the Strait of Hormuz that existed before February 28th. And new adaptations, new supplies, new trading routes will all be explored.
Sure, we'd struck a balance that had held for 40, 50 years, that the U.S. was protecting the freedom of navigation through the Strait. There were flare-ups during various Gulf conflicts, but never a closure like the one we saw.
And Asia banked on it, Europe banked on it, and we, to a certain extent, banked on it.
Exactly right. Over the years, we were heavily reliant on Middle East oil. As the shale revolution took over, our share of that in terms of trade went down. But you saw concentrated import dependence in East Asia, Southeast Asia. When the crisis struck, those were the places that felt it first. The U.S. was relatively insulated. But because oil is a globally traded commodity, we can't escape the price impacts.
And very quickly, when the president said, as he did late this afternoon, whatever happens in Iran is not going to last long, that was a means, it seemed to me, of him signaling to the oil markets, don't get too fluttery. It won't be a prolonged issue.
The president's been doing that this whole time. Markets still are looking, they're not pricing in a closure yet. They're still sort of looking at a less open strait.
Right.
We'll have to watch what happens in the next 24, 48 hours.
As we have been continuously. Joseph Mykut, great stuff. I appreciate it coming in. Thank you very much. Up next, a legal victory for Trump accuser E. Jean Carroll. The decision a judge handed down today, and the $5 million that might be coming her way, and more. It's $5.8 million, I think. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks very much for hanging out with us. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. A federal judge has ordered $5 million from President Trump to be released to E. Jean Carroll. Slightly more than that, I think. Last week, the Supreme Court declined to hear a Trump appeal on this entire protracted legal matter. You will recall back in 2023, a civil jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse, which he denied then and denies now, and also found him liable for defamation. Now, it's unclear when this money will be paid out. Trump's lawyers are filing yet another appeal. New York officials say a compromised building, high-rise in Midtown Manhattan, is now, quote, safe and stable. Crews reported that the old Pfizer building was at risk of collapse yesterday after 2 columns buckled, and that forced evacuation. Since then, crews have installed temporary shoring and beams. The building is being converted into an apartment complex. A developer of the project called the incident, quote, a typical construction mishap, unquote. A progressive Democrat and a moderate Democrat clashed in a tense Senate debate in Michigan last night. Congresswoman Haley Stevens and Dr. Abdul El-Sayed did not hold back while squaring off on campaign funding, Israel, and much more. Here is a sampling.
I'm the only one on this stage who doesn't have a talent agent trying to pitch me for paid speeches. And unlike my opponent, I'm not running at the first mic or camera I see.
Not one of those ads was brought to you by the Congresswoman's campaign. All of them brought to you by corporate PACs and AIPAC, trying to buy a politician who's going to do their bidding instead of yours. The Congresswoman needs to answer is, why has she allowed $40 million of outside spending, the bulk of it coming from AIPAC, to come into this race?
What my opponent needs to answer is, why is the GOP spending thousands of dollars to prop up his campaign, saying that he will make Mike Rogers the next U.S. Senator?
If Congresswoman Stevens makes it, or Mike Rogers wins, either way, Israel will win.
Look, I worked really hard to make sure that Kamala Harris was going to get elected and that Donald Trump would be stopped. And my opponent did nothing.
We've got to build a movement of people to get money out of politics, put money in your pocket, and pass Medicare for all.
I am fed up and fired up. I am fed up with Michiganders getting screwed over by bad policies that are coming down from the Trump administration.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from Lansing, Michigan. Nicole, great to have you with us. What's the aftermath of that big and fiery at times debate?
Yeah, well, I think that mashup really encapsulated some of the highlights there. I mean, look, this is a chance, really one of the last chances before this August 4th primary for each of these candidates to define themselves and define each other, especially now that this race is down to two. Of course, you'll recall just earlier this week, State Senator Mallory McMorrow suspended her campaign. She kind of ran in the middle of both of these candidates, with Haley Stevens being more to the moderate side of the party, whereas El Sayed represents the more progressive side of the party. So that being said, they're also trying to woo her supporters as well. So this was really about trying to, again, define each other in this race. Of course, El Sayed described himself as someone who wants to keep money out of politics, who will be this Washington outsider. He called himself a threat to politics and said this is why Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump don't want him in the U.S. Senate. Haley Stevens, on the other hand, of course, is currently serving in Congress. She's a four-term congresswoman, so she really pointed to her record working across the aisle, saying that we need a workhorse in the U.S. Senate, not a show horse or a celebrity senator. They were also questioned, in addition to Israel, they were questioned about affordability, AI, immigration enforcement, where they did spar at times. They were also asked about the future of the Democratic Party repeatedly, especially in light of some of those Democratic socialist wins that we have seen, these anti-establishment candidates who have come to the fore in places like Colorado, New York, D.C. That is something I asked both candidates about after the debate as well. Take a listen. Do you think the party is going too far left?
Well, look, I am concerned about policy making by Twitter, and my opponent has failed to win any election. He has failed to win a tough race. This is a toss-up. We stand with unions. We guarantee health care. We take on oligopolies and monopolies. I think that has to be the pathway forward. That's not, quote-unquote, progressive policy. That's just good policy for people.
Of course, both of these candidates are trying to garner some momentum coming out of this debate. El Sayed announced that he will be campaigning later this month with Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, both of whom have endorsed El Sayed. Also, Haley Stevens, she is touting a new poll that is recently out. This is just one poll, though, mind you, which shows her now edging out El Sayed just by a point. But now that this is a two-person race. So, again, each candidate trying to, run with the wind behind their sails at this point after last night's debate. And a lot is at stake here because whoever wins this primary come August 4th will take on Mike Rogers, the Republican in this race who is running unopposed. Of course, Democrats really want to try to hold on to this seat if they want to stand any chance of trying to regain control of the Senate major.
Nicole Killian, thank you so much. Michigan is a hold state for Democrat Gary Peters, the incumbent Democrat not seeking re-election. Still ahead. Honoring history or erasing heritage. The White House, in a big report, accuses the Smithsonian of political activism. We will explore next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. As promised, we're going to dig into this fight over history between the White House and the Smithsonian. There's brand new information on this. The head of the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch III, is rejecting a White House report that accuses the institution he leads, quote, of extreme political activism. According to new reporting in the Washington Post, Bunch told Smithsonian staffers the report, quote, is not a fair characterization of the work and totality of the National Museum of American History. Philip Kennicott has been following this story. He wrote an op-ed about it, which caught our eye. He is a senior art and architecture critic at the Washington Post. Philip, I'm glad to have you with us. You read the White House report about the Smithsonian and the Museum of American History. Explain to my audience what it says and what you find leaky about the assertions.
Right. So this is an effort by the administration to prove a claim that Donald Trump has been making really since the beginning of his second term, and that is that the Smithsonian is biased. It doesn't tell an uplifting story of American history. The exhibitions are divisive. The wall texts are not accurate historically. It does not actually prove any of those claims, but what it really does is announce, I think, the ambition of the administration to take over the National Museum of American History and the Smithsonian, and even more than that, to really change the way Americans are taught and learn history to a narrative of exceptionalism and one that doesn't really have much room for any of the darker chapters in this country's life.
Be specific about darker chapters that you think the administration has wrongly accused of bias or political activism, and that nevertheless tell an important aspect of our history, though it may be uncomfortable.
Right. So again and again throughout the report, they say that the Smithsonian is putting too much emphasis on things like slavery, immigration, the rights of women, civil rights, all of these things they see as part of a national narrative of overcoming, of progress, of moving beyond these evils. As one example that I cited in the story I wrote for the Washington Post, they take the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This is a really toxic piece of anti-immigration legislation that specifically targeted people from China who were coming in to prospect for gold, to work for railroads. If you look back and you look at the speeches and the rhetoric in America around that time, it is very clearly an overt act of white supremacy. The report faults the Smithsonian for connecting those two things, even though the connection is just painfully apparent.
And is it, from your vantage point, Philip, having read this report, that the administration is uncomfortable with the narrative of America overcoming its flaws, or just doesn't want to have any flaws highlighted at all?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's a certain amount of mixed feelings in the report itself. I think somebody who's been had their hand on this report realizes that they have to at least acknowledge these things. But overwhelming, the message is that these things are really so incidental as maybe not even to be worthy of mentioning in America's History Museum, or if mentioned only in passing and only relative to our having won the Civil War, our having passed the civil rights legislation, and so forth. They really don't acknowledge any unfinished business in the American project.
Is it possible, Philip, for this administration to take over the Smithsonian?
Well, it's going to be more difficult for them to do that than it was to take over the Kennedy Center, which they did quite quickly, and they ran that into the ground. The Smithsonian is more independent, and it has an independent board of regents. But there are a couple of powerful forms of leverage they have. The vice president and the head of the Supreme Court sit on the Board of Regents, and Congress gives about $1 billion or more every year to the Smithsonian. And Congress has shown in the past that it's willing to use the leverage of public funding to make changes in Smithsonian content. So there are two avenues whereby, if not direct control, they can exert a lot of leverage indirectly.
Philip Kennicott of the Washington Post, I appreciate the time very much. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat, tries to solve the mystery surrounding Republican Senator Mitch McConnell's health. He asked for some specific updates as governor. We'll have more on that when we come back. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome to The Takeout Tavern. That's not apple cider, folks, I assure you. Republican strategist Doug Heye and Democratic strategist, CBS News contributor Joel Payne. All right, news flash out of Maine. Patrick Dempsey, otherwise known as McDreamy, not running for the Senate in Maine. He had to put out an op-ed because there is such a desperate need for someone not named Graham Platner who might have some appeal beyond standard political lanes in Maine that he had to let everyone know he's not going to run. Joel, give me your handicap on this current situation and what you think will happen in the next 48 hours.
We're in a really good place. Nothing's on fire, Major. Look, obviously, there's a lot of egg on the face of lots of people related to Graham Platner. I think what's interesting
and
is
Chuck
that
Schumer is saying, I told you so.
Sure, but like Chuck Schumer also got behind a candidate who could not defeat a very—
Janet Mills.
Yeah, Janet Mills, who could not defeat a clearly compromised candidate in Graham Platner. Graham Platner's people obviously didn't do the work of vetting. I actually think it speaks to a larger thing about the types of candidates that voters are looking for, that they would go to a compromised candidate like this. Tells you a little bit something about the mood of the Democratic electorate. And I think it's something that Democrats are just going to really have to wrestle with, because I know that people are trying to dunk on each other in the middle and in the left of the party. I think it's a moment for everybody to take a lesson.
Bottom line, is it a winnable seat anymore?
I think it is winnable. Is it tougher? Sure. I mean, look, in a favorable environment, Sarah Gideon was not able to defeat Susan Collins. in a favorable environment. Shanna Bellows was not able to defeat Susan Collins, both very traditional candidates. So Platner trying something different, I think that there's wisdom in it. I still think it's winnable if Democrats can get beyond this process and circle behind one candidate.
Doug, I want to talk to you about Kentucky because Andy Beshear, the Democratic governor, wrote a letter today saying, Senator McConnell, you owe Kentuckians, not me, but mostly Kentuckians, an explanation. Are you going to return to the Senate? What is your health status? Let us in on this.
You know, politics is a long game. So let's remember that Andy Beshear's father ran and lost against Mitch McConnell in 1996. So
memories.
So that letter has been a long time coming. Look, they're fair questions.
It's a legit question.
It's a legitimate question, and it's a legitimate question not just because of the substance of what we've seen with McConnell in the past, but because of what we've seen with so many other members of Congress and senators in the past. And so if I'm Team McConnell, I want to put something out on video or a photo with a thumbs up rather quickly. It doesn't have to be a response how Beshear doesn't get to dictate how McConnell responds, but McConnell and his team need to respond.
I've got 20 minutes to talk to Mitch McConnell right now if he wants.
Yes, right. 20 minutes. I'm glad you mentioned that because, Doug, there was a startling similarity in the way three different people described a conversation they said they had via telephone with Mitch McConnell. All said it was 20 minutes. All said it covered more or less the same topics. That read to me a little too compact and conveniently repetitive.
You know, you always want everybody on the team to be on the script.
Same page.
You just don't want them to memorize the exact same words on the exact same script. That can be a problem for you.
Also, why is that? Because it raises questions about whether it's true or not.
Absolutely.
Of course. Hey, even in good health, if Mitch McConnell has 20 minutes to talk to Scott Jennings, I think Mitch McConnell has better things to do with his time, to be honest with you.
There is a conversation. Maybe it's just in Washington, but obviously Governor Beshear has appointment powers. Has to do a Republican, because that's what the state legislature passed over his veto. Could Thomas Massie be the Republican who replaces Mitch McConnell if Mitch McConnell can no longer serve in the United States Senate?
My understanding is it has to come from a list submitted by the state party.
Okay.
And in that case, I don't think
Thomas Massie wouldn't be on that list.
They wouldn't be promoting it unless it's a way to get him completely out of it and say, you can be a senator for 3 months and then you're done forever.
Can I just pick up on something that Doug said a little bit earlier? I do think that, like, us here in D.C. and the people who kind of run this city, I think we got to get some religion about why is the gerontocracy holding on so much to power? And it's not a Republican or a Democratic Party. Dianne Feinstein, the same thing happened with her years ago.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because these people think that these seats belong to them and not to the people that they represent. And I think it's something, frankly, that folks in both parties got to get their arms around. It is not healthy. God bless Chuck Grassley. It's not healthy to have a 99-year-old man in the Senate representing Iowans. It's not healthy to have someone who is compromised at this level like Mitch McConnell, and it wasn't healthy to have Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. And the American people decided it wasn't a good idea for Joe Biden, who maybe does not have the type of severe health problems, but certainly did not show like someone who was vigorous. It's not healthy. It's not a good idea.
Doug, pick up on that point.
Yeah, look, it's hard for them.
You've seen it on the Senate.
Yeah, and it's hard for them to say no for a lot of reasons. And part of it is it's a very good life if you have the member pin. You are called sir or ma'am wherever you go.
And if you're in the Senate, you have a vast staff that takes care of every single need you have.
Absolutely. And basically the rules don't exist for you. And so why we see so many senators and members of Congress getting in trouble is because the rules don't exist for them. So maybe they break them, even if they don't fully exist. But they go on codels. They travel the world. Some of that is work. Some of it has a lot of empty time on their schedule to say, oh, we have 4 hours of free time in Istanbul. We're going to the bazaar.
Screwed? Who gets screwed? It's the family in Louisville. It's the family in Western Kentucky at Paducah who doesn't have the type of representation that they deserve right now.
Because they become increasingly inattentive?
Yes, they become increasingly inattentive. And, Major, these people, when people elect you to office, they trust you to have good judgment. It is not good judgment if you're not healthy to deal with issues of state and of politics when you can't be healthy. You can't be on your feet.
Joel, you get the last word here at the Tavern. Thank you very much. Doug High, always good to have you here. Enjoy, my brothers. Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout coming to you from the Tavern, as we like to do. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, even at the Tavern, occasionally clever. Daily Report coming your way next.